Hello, and welcome to the second installment of the Island Symphony Orchestra's Artists for Artists, a series of virtual masterclasses for advanced amateur musicians and aspiring young musicians. My name is Eric Stewart. I'm the music director of the Island Symphony Orchestra. And first, I'd like to thank, on behalf of the Island Symphony Orchestra, the Huntington Arts Council and the New York State Council on the Arts for the grant that makes these masterclasses possible, as well as Suffolk County for public funding that makes these masterclasses possible. Today, we are quite thrilled to welcome Mindy Kaufman of the New York Philharmonic. I have been listening to Mindy playing the flute and piccolo with the New York Philharmonic for many years, and we're delighted that she'll be able to offer her experience as an orchestral player and her insight as an incredible soloist as well. I think you're all really going to enjoy Mindy's playing as well as everything she has to say. Welcome, Mindy. We're so glad to have you with us here today. I wanted to ask you just a little bit about what you've been doing the past few months during these crazy times, especially crazy for musicians when we can't be together with our audiences and our colleagues and ensembles. What you've been doing to keep musical juices flowing?
It's great to meet you, Eric. So thank you for having me today. And I'd love to talk about what I've been doing. It's been a challenge to find some inspiration. And so I decided early on, I opened my stairwell and I looked up and down and I thought, the acoustics are pretty good in here. And I decided to give some short concerts for my neighbors in the stairwell. So I left a few notes under my neighbors' doors and I said I would play at 7:15 following the 7 o'clock clapping for essential workers.
Mm-hmm.
And I played for about 10 or 15 minutes. And I played all kinds of music. I played Bach partitas. I played arrangements of Bach and the flute partita, plus the violin music and the cello music. I played Telemann fantasies for flute. I played contemporary music. I introduced a few contemporary pieces, and I played one piece that was for alto flute and tape.
Oh, wow.
And my neighbors loved it. So they kept, at first I played once and they said, well, will you be playing tomorrow? So I played the next night and then pretty soon I was playing every night.
Oh, wow. That's great. So do you have any projects now that the New York Philharmonic is doing?
Yes, I am really happy that the Philharmonic started presenting concerts outside. It's called Bandwagon, and it's voluntary. They've asked people if they want to play, and they have a truck, and so they're and a sound system. They're bringing a sound person and lights and the music stands and everything. So it's very well done, and these concerts, they're about 25 minutes long. Mm-hmm. And they take place in all of the boroughs. So there are groups of 3 to 5 people.
Okay.
I will be playing one in October with a trio, flute, clarinet, and bassoon. And it'll be the first time that I've played with my colleagues since March.
Wow. And did you mention those are pop-up concerts, so they're not necessarily publicized before they go up?
That's right.
Okay, that's a really exciting thing that the New York Philharmonic is doing, and I'm sure the whole city will be thrilled to see you guys again, because I mean, we miss that so much. I know personally I miss hearing you guys play so much, so hopefully I'll be lucky enough to be around when one of those pops up.
I hope so. I walked by one the other day, last weekend, and it was in front of Lincoln Center. Wow. And I was walking by, it was as it was finishing.
Hmm.
And so it was in Dante Park, which is right across from Lincoln Center. It's around 66th Street. It's where the farmers market is held on a couple of days a week. So
Hmm.
it's a pretty big space, and we have to be spaced out from one another. So we
Yeah.
need to stand 12 feet away from each other, and
Hmm.
that's why it has to be a very small group of people,
Right.
3 people.
Okay.
So I'm very excited about doing that, and the concerts are also with a countertenor. So and then
Wow.
there's also a commission involved. Um, so we haven't quite figured out what we're playing in October yet, because we just scheduled it, but we will figure out some really fun things to play.
Oh,
And
that's
from
great.
what I saw the other day, that people on the street were just thrilled. I heard West Side Story. I heard they were singing Maria from, or what? No, maybe not Maria. They were singing something from West Side Story,
Hmm.
and I heard it, and I thought, who's singing right now? And so that's why I walked by,
Uh,
and there I see the bandwagon. So
wow.
that they're not announcing it because they don't want to have a big crowd of people,
Okay.
because right now we cannot have big crowds. We're even
Mhm.
outside.
Right. Right. Oh, well, as a composer myself, I'm so excited to hear that you're involving composers, because to talk about let's just say some of the forgotten people, artists during this time, composers, they're just all locked up inside their rooms, with their own music. So I'm glad to hear that commissioning is happening. So that's great.
Oh, good,
Yeah.
great.
Can we talk about some things uh, that I think orchestral musicians, especially amateur orchestral musicians and young orchestral musicians, might be interested to hear from somebody with your incredible experience and your talent and what you bring to an ensemble when you perform in it. I was wondering how you approach the preparation for going into an orchestral rehearsal or even any large ensemble rehearsal. What steps you take to be ready to do that first rehearsal?
Well, first of all, of course, I learned my own part, but there's a lot more to playing with other people, and I also spend quite a lot of time learning all of the parts. So in an orchestral piece, I will take the score and look at the score and follow it along with a recording. And nowadays, there's so many recordings, you can go to YouTube and
Mhm.
find just about everything. If I can't find it on YouTube, or even if I can, I still do buy CDs, and but if it's something that I don't have already. So I think it's very important to listen to the piece. Then another thing that I do in an orchestral setting, if it's tricky, I will listen to it with my part and count it with my part, and then I follow it both with my score and with my part. So I'll go over it several times. First, I'll follow with the score, then I'll go back and follow it with my part only. So I make sure I know when there's 5 measures rest and a fermata, that I know where that fermata is and what comes next. Because otherwise, it's very easy sometimes to get lost in an orchestra and to not know exactly what's going on unless you've looked at the score. So I try to
Absolutely.
be, yeah, so I try to be very prepared before that first rehearsal. I come into the first rehearsal, and so do my colleagues, as if we're playing a concert with no rehearsal.
Mhm.
So at that first rehearsal, I know the piece well enough to get through it if it were a concert.
That's great. And I think sometimes players might not realize this. Of course, it's wonderful when a conductor gives you a cue, but of course, you're expected to be able to come in with no cue. Isn't that correct?
Right, that's right. Yeah, I don't expect to get cues. It's nice to get them, but I don't, I'm not, I would be okay without a cue, except if it's extremely tricky.
Right, right.
And the other thing that I do is that I oftentimes play. Then the third time I go through it, I play with the record. So, so at a certain point, I just start playing my part with different recordings, and that's
Okay,
just mainly because it's a little more fun,
right.
and it just gives me the feeling that I'm playing in an orchestra. It's not quite the same because you don't get to pick the tempos, and
Right.
and it's not, the sound isn't the same, but it's still helpful.
One thing I wanted to ask about was playing together with your section in the orchestra. How do you balance the concept of listening with your section, playing as a section, almost creating the illusion that you're playing chamber music with your section while at the same time together with the conductor, following the conductor's musical ideas and following the conductor's tempi? How do you put those two things together?
That's a great question. And for I find it's very important to listen not just to myself, but I have one ear on me, another ear on my section, and my eyes are on the conductor. And it's, you have to put them all together. If you're only following the conductor but not listening, then you won't be together with the rest of the ensemble. And so there's a fine balance in there where 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 you're following the conductor, but you're also playing with what you hear. And I find sometimes inexperienced players follow the conductor and ignore what they're hearing, and then you get ensemble problems. Now there are times when players are dragging, and you can probably speak to that, and you're trying to get people to move and not to listen as much, or not to wait. I think it's more about waiting. So, and there are times also as a player when you lead and times when you follow. There are times when you blend and times when you stick out. So
Right.
there's not just one way of playing. It depends what chair you're playing in, and what your what exactly you're playing. Sometimes even if you're playing principal, you blend with the other members of the woodwind section. But sometimes you're leading the woodwind section. Sometimes you really, so you have to change your philosophy. There's no set philosophy on that.
Okay, okay, yeah, and I'm sure it has a lot to do with, like you said, the part you're playing, the piece you're playing, the style of the piece. You know, obviously certain styles may require you to stick out. Like if you're playing a Mahler symphony and it has three Fs when everybody else is piano, then you're not going to blend in there. And one other thing that I got to thinking about is it like you said, listening, but also keeping a real gauge of what the conductor is doing, because there might be some conductors that have the way where their beat falls in with the rest of the ensemble might be different. Some conductors might like to be a little bit ahead. Some conductors might not. So you kind of have to, the orchestra has to get a sense of that and then register that in with what they're hearing. So that's what I thought of when you mentioned those things.
Yes. Now orchestras, orchestras are big groups, and they tend to be a little bit slow to respond. It's not like just when you play with like a flute and piano, where the response is quick and you can make quick changes. Orchestras can be sometimes a little sluggish, and sometimes the conductors really has to work hard to get them to move. But and you can help with that as well. But there also are there's sort of a vibe in the group about the way the group plays, and people that play together like our orchestra, I'm used to playing with my colleagues. So we kind of have a way of playing together.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Like you said, the sluggishness of the orchestra, sometimes it feels like you're steering a gigantic ship, and that's you can't turn on a dime sometimes. But
That's perfect analogy. Exactly. Yeah.
okay, so now since we're talking about playing orchestral music, but you're also going to be performing a solo piece for us, and I'd like to talk about how you usually would advise an amateur musician, a young musician, to balance working on their excerpts versus working on their solo repertoire versus working on their scales and other things like that, and especially if let's say there was a day when they don't have a lot of time to practice, how would you say is the best way to divide these things up, or maybe incorporate them together?
I think it's very important to have somewhat of a routine of, I mean, I'm not sure, you know, some people have 30 minutes and some people have 2 hours. I think that you need to have, I have a routine of my own where I do some low register and some high register, playing softly, and some intervals, and then some scales. I think the biggest issue is to really be mindful when you're practicing, because yes, it's possible to practice 4 or 5 or 6 hours a day, but what are you getting enough done in those hours? You could be doing 2 hours and be very focused and get a lot done in 2 hours. So I'm assuming that amateurs and non-professionals, if they have another job and they don't have enough time and they have an hour a day. So I would divide that hour into maybe a half an hour of fundamentals, and then a half an hour of music. I think it's really
Okay.
important to play, to make music, and
Mm-hmm.
to enjoy it also, and just have fun with it. So
Absolutely.
so so yes, I spent a lot of time as a student on things like scales and thirds and chromatics and all kinds of things that come into play in every solo piece you play. When you go play a Mozart concerto, it's made up of scales and arpeggios. So if you've spent the time on that, if you spend the time on that so that your technique is good, then you don't have to spend that much time on the concerto
Right, right.
working on those things, because you can already do that. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah.
And you mentioned something about having 6 hours to practice versus having an hour to practice, and being productive with your time, and the productivity of your time doesn't always correlate with the amount of time you put in. And so that led me to wonder if there are some common practice habits you see in young musicians or amateur musicians that might be, what's the word I'm looking for? Not the most efficient practice habits, and things that those should be avoided when practicing.
Yes, I do see sometimes that people don't always, they're not really hearing what is coming out from their instrument. They're kind of playing, but they're not really listening to what's going on. And I think for one thing you can do is try to listen to a recording and really listen to what somebody is doing, and really put your ears there. And it's the same skill as when you're playing in an ensemble, because you really have to listen to all the other lines just
Mhm.
as much as you're listening to your own line. I find I play a treble instrument, so I tend to hear the treble parts more than the bass lines. I have to make myself listen for the bass and the
Mhm.
inner voices. I mean, I hear them, but I don't focus on them as much as I
Mhm.
kind of focus on the top lines. But that's another experiment that people can do when they play in an ensemble. really listen to see what lines that you never heard before, and try to hear all of it, and that will really help your listening skills. And so when you listen to a record of something, really listen not just to the flute part, but to all of the parts. And if you're trying to improve your own playing also, and you listen to Ron Paul, for example, really listen to what he's doing, listen to where he's taking a breath. You don't have to take a breath there, but it's good to notice those things. Where does he make a taper? Does he, what is his phrasing really like? Do you hear what he's doing with his phrasing? I'm just using a Ron Paul, but it doesn't matter. It could be anybody. It could be an instrument you don't even play.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really important. Listen to a singer and listen to what they're doing. And I think that those kinds of listening practice habits are really helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think like you said, listening to those little articulations that professionals that we admire, not only does it help open up the ears to understand how to put the nuts and bolts together to build a pure expressive musical phrase, but it can also inspire one to try different things and try different places to take a breath, let's say, or different accent a different part of the phrase as you feel it. So I think it can, emulation in that way can also lead to discoveries. And I'm curious about when you are interpreting music, who are the players who, let's say, who first inspired you?
Well, Ron Paul was one of them. I heard him when I was in high school and live in Carnegie Hall,
Mm-hmm.
and he played the 4 Mozart flute quartets, and it was just fantastic. And for me, that was great. I also had a few LPs of him.
Mm-hmm.
He was the man when I was a student. He was the one.
Yeah.
And he still is the one.
Yeah.
But there are so many great flutists. So but during my generation, he was really a big influence. And sorry, my teachers, I had fabulous teachers who also had fabulous teachers. So a lot of things get passed down from teachers. My teacher, my primary teacher in high school had studied a lot with Marcel Moyes.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of his ideas got passed through her to me.
Okay.
And that was really nice to get some tradition out of some stylistic traditions. But I also want to say that traditions change. I don't think that you should stay rooted in one style for your
Mm-hmm.
entire lifetime.
Thanks, Mindy. This is great.
Okay. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi again, Mindy. That was wonderful.
Thank you, Eric.
So first, Chris, this piece in particular, what would you say are some of the main technical challenges for somebody who wants to take this piece on?
Well, this piece, being a French piece, it's really it's going to be a different style than playing Mozart or Bach. It's got, especially in the first movement, there's just a lot of rubato in the slow part of this piece. This piece is like many of the French pieces from this era, with a slow section followed by a fast section. And of course, it's great to have a wonderful pianist like I played with on this video, Brian Wagorn, who is just
Fantastic.
fabulous at being flexible and moving, and so that's very important to approach this piece. Also, to be able to bend your sound a little bit so that it's not a pushed sound at all. It'll be it could be very gentle in many places in this first movement, and then it's when it gets a little bit later on, it says poco animato, and then it becomes very expressive and passionate about halfway down the first page, when you're in the very high register.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then it ends
Sorry,
very
go ahead.
quietly again.
I mentioned I really enjoyed just a few bars before the poco animato, when it goes to on this, when you go up to this A, it goes into like a new tonal space, and then the mood totally changes. And the way I noticed how you place that note, and the sensitivity to just with your pianist, it sounds like you guys have rehearsed this so much. It's impressive, but I'm sure a lot of that's just intuition and being familiar with the style.
Yes, that's true. Because of COVID, we have not rehearsed it very much at all. We rehearsed it once.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
It was bravi, because it sounds like you guys are just totally one on the same page. And speaking of such things like that, we did have a question from our stream about the ability to rehearse in person, and how have you done any other in-person rehearsing other than, let's say, playing with the pianist for this piece, or has that not really been happening yet, or are you starting to do that again?
This was the first time that I've played with another musician since March.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you for doing that for us.
Well, you're welcome. I thought it would be fun to add the piano part to this, and really so that we could really get the flavor of the whole piece and not just the flute part. So that's
Absolutely.
that's why I
it was
did that.
wonderful. And I was wondering, because obviously the flute does have the capability to go through such a wide sonic range, the size, and I wonder if you could talk about just keeping a consistent sound throughout the range of the instrument, and I guess techniques for doing that, how you think about it, and that idea.
Yes. Well, Marcel Moyes, who was just a fantastic teacher and kind of a great pedagogue, and he wrote a lot of books, and one of them called De la Sonorité talks about that very aspect of playing the flute. And there's one exercise, and I know that every flute player knows this exercise. It's basically long tones, but but you do these long tones, and as you're only going in half steps, but pretty soon you're an octave away from where you started. So how is the tone? You try to keep your tone consistent so that it doesn't change color, especially on the flute when you go from a note like D, which is all fingers down, to C sharp, which is nothing down, one key down. So the tone quality is very different on those two notes. So as you practice, or you try to listen or if you do this exercise, you try to listen for so that your tone quality, that you can get the same kind of tone quality. And the same thing could happen on any wind instrument when you, on a clarinet, when you go over the break. Or I'm sure every instrument has places like that. And so we work as instrumentalists to cover that up, or to use it. We can use it to our advantage if we need to, but then we also need to be able to have the two notes that are right next to each other sound similar.
Absolutely, yes. As myself, as a hobbyist horn player, I do know that you might have notes that are close together, but because of the valve configuration, they're two completely different resistances. So you have to be ready to accommodate that with your embouchure, with your breath, as they come, as each note changes. So yeah, it sounds like that's similar things with most woodwind instruments, or any wind instrument, I'm sure. And another question we have is about your particular expertise, something you probably have to do quite often, which is switching from flute to piccolo, perhaps in the course of a few seconds at times. And what the challenges of that, and any advice you have for people who are troubled with orchestras?
I think that I've gotten more comfortable with it as I've gotten older. It used to be a lot more difficult for me. One thing that has changed is that instruments have changed, and I have instruments that I feel pretty comfortable switching back and forth. So it's not so hard for me now. You can I hate to say that it's the instrument, because of course it's the player, but there are some instruments that might be easier to switch back and forth. So that's something to look for, an instrument that you're comfortable with. And aside from that, I practice enough on each instrument so that I could pick it up without doing a warm-up, really. And so I'm comfortable just putting the instrument up and playing without too much warm-up. And maybe that's something that you can address in practicing also, because orchestral players, what we do is, we don't get a second chance. So as a performer, well, all performers, we don't get a second chance. We have to get it the first time. And so I find when I'm practicing, I need to practice to make sure that I get it the first time. I'm coming at it with a focus. Because if I restart something, let's say I have something that's hard to start and I don't quite get it, and then you do it 2 or 3 times, and then by the third time, of course, you've got it. You have to use that kind of thinking on the first time. So that's something to put into your practice.
Absolutely. And I know, talking about practice routines, I have noticed also that many young musicians or non-professionals, when they do practice something, like you said, one of the pitfalls might be starting something over and over, and then, with the not having it set in your mind that just go for it and get used to building yourself up so you can just get it in one go. And I think even as a non-professional, to when you play in an orchestra, like you said, usually you got one shot. So you have to, in the practice mindset, I think this is what we're alluding to, build yourself up so your mindset is, this is going to happen in one go. Here we go. And I think it's a mindset sort of thing as well. I don't know if you agree with that.
I do. It is also that you need to figure out what do you need to do to get that on your first try. So that's a little bit of analytics, I think. If let's say it's a soft note, you have to figure out where that mouthpiece needs to be for you to get that out the first time.
Right, absolutely. We have a question here. What is the most challenging orchestral work you've ever played?
I think Tchaikovsky 4 is probably the most challenging piccolo part for me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
because you don't play for the first 30 minutes of the
Oh.
piece, so you just sit for 30 minutes, and then it's a very hard. It's over with very quickly. So at least it's over with, but it goes by very quickly.
That kind of goes, as you said, that's one you definitely get one shot. You better be ready, right?
Yeah.
Okay, another question about this is kind of I think talking about the world of professional orchestral musicians and sections, and what it's like when you have a new member joining your section, and those players in the section take part in the decision of selecting new players, or is that more of I guess higher ups making those decisions?
Well, we have committees to select new players, but you have to have tenure. So you have to have been in the orchestra for approximately a year and a half before you can serve on a committee. And so it doesn't really have anything to do with if you're you just have to be tenured, and then we have a whole audition process and lots of rules about the auditions.
Okay, all right. And what is it like when you have a member joining? I'm sure you're looking for a balance of somebody who offers a new voice and a new personality, but then at the same time somebody who's obviously comfortable playing with the way all of you play and can fit right into that. And I wonder what that experience is like, having somebody new into the wind section, for example.
Well, I think that we probably look for people that do already play, that know how to fit in to the playing, and also people grow on the job. Not so. We all grow on the job. So it's not that everything has to be one way when you first join the orchestra.
Okay. Now, do you do a lot of teaching over Zoom?
On Zoom, did you say?
Yes.
Well, I never did Zoom before March, so
right.
I am now. Yes.
But what is your experience just from a teacher perspective, and let's say from both sides, what do you think are effective? What do you find are effective ways to use Zoom as a teaching tool if you're a teacher, and then effective ways to get the most out of Zoom lessons if you're a student?
The Zoom has been going actually miraculously well, surprisingly well. I'm teaching one student who I've never met, and it's been fine. I'm able to hear very well what I need to hear and what we need to work on. So it's been fine on Zoom. The only thing that's hard sometimes is that the connection, sometimes it breaks up a little bit, but it's been, for the most part, it's been fine. So, what was that second question you asked me?
From a student perspective, to get the most out of a Zoom lesson.
Well, I think that for students, the best thing is for them to get their setup in advance of the lesson so that we don't have to spend time on the lesson. Sometimes the student doesn't have the camera where I can see all of them, so they don't have a good, I don't have a good visual of the student. So that's one thing, make sure their camera is set up well. Sometimes I just put a phone or an iPad on a music stand, but it has to be far enough away that you can see the whole student in the picture.
Right, and that's a good point, because sometimes we just take for granted the fact that while we're teaching in person, and observe the entire person. We can see how they're breathing. We can see what the posture is, but just realized how important that is, and it's about more than just hearing the sound, critiquing what's coming out of the instrument, but sometimes, you know, just seeing somebody, if they're slouched over, maybe that's a problem you can fix right away. So I think that is something that, yeah, we take for granted when we're teaching in person. And now that we're on Zoom, we have to take account of that. All right,
Yes.
and let's, when playing music from this era, which is, this piece was written, it says 1906. So early 20th century, obviously lots of romantic influence in this music. Are there, I guess, are there certain phrases or certain things that kind of stick out to you that you like to emphasize, or certain things that you, because I think this is a great era of flute music particularly. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, I don't know, when I think about flute music is Debussy and the solos that he wrote, let's say, in the Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun. So are there certain stylistic elements in playing this era of repertoire that kind of come to mind that you could talk about?
Yes. Yeah, I picked this piece because it was a piece, I actually played this piece for the first time when I was in ninth grade. I can hardly believe that I could play it back then because I'm sure I didn't think about style or anything like that. This is a kind of a typical piece that gets that younger players play, although I think it's actually a very difficult piece to play well. But maybe everything is when it gets down to it. So aside from the difficulty of it, I think that it's just it's just important to use a light style on it, and to not be too heavy-handed with a French piece from this era. So and Gaubert wrote many beautiful pieces. It just was a great time for woodwind instruments, the early 20th century.
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't actually familiar with Gaubert at all, and so I'm glad you introduced this piece to me. I guess since we did focus on romantic music in your performance, what would be some elements if a flute player is playing something that's, say, more classical, the differences in style and approach, and even things like how you attack a note, how you phrase things. Could you talk a little bit about that? If you're playing something, let's say Mozart, for example, how would you approach that?
I'm sorry, did you say Mahler?
Oh, sorry, Mozart.
Mozart, okay. Yeah, sorry, it's breaking up just a tiny bit.
I'm sorry.
So that's okay. I would say, yes, of course, tonguing, like, for example, there's a whole page in the fast movement, da 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 da. Now that's an articulation that you would find in Mozart, but I don't think you would play it quite the same way here as in Mozart. Mozart, I wanted both of these passages to be very clear, but Mozart especially, to me, needs to sound like a jewel. It's just got to be pure and crystal clear, and it's a different. It'll be a slightly different, even though it's funny. It's the same articulation, but it's gonna sound a little bit different. It should sound a little bit different. This should not sound like Mozart.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's a great passage. I think you're talking about I see on page 4, where you have the two slurred notes and then the two unslurred notes in the 16th note passages.
Right.
Yes, it could come right out of Mozart, but it's a starkly different articulation in the different style. I can see that.
Yes.
So
in general, and I just say in general, when I have two slurred notes and two tongued notes, I make the second note short. Da 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 da. So I like to keep that second note short, because if it's too long, it goes da 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 da, and it sort of muddies up the passage.
Absolutely. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. almost, it's almost a similar articulation you might even see in Bach sometimes when you have that sigh motif, just to keep the line moving. Okay, I think you've given us some great information, some great insight. It was really great to have you. I think seems like the chief has really enjoyed you coming on, so thank you for that. We thank you again from the Island Symphony Orchestra, and that wraps up our interview with Mindy Kaufman. And we really hope that we can see you again soon with the New York Philharmonic, because we miss you guys.
Thank you. I miss everybody.
Thank
you very much. This was really fun.
Thank everybody for tuning in, and catch you on the next masterclass, which will be Tuesday, October 13th, with trombonist Bert Mason, who has performed as well with the New York Philharmonic and performs regularly with the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. So please tune in to see Bert on Tuesday, October 13th at 4 p.m. Mindy, I'll see you later. We'll see you later at the New York Philharmonic, hopefully sooner than later.
Great. Thank you, Eric.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, bye.